Hello again, everyone, and welcome to the program. I'm Stephen Stone, Chancellor of Trent University here in Peterborough and Durham in Canada, and also a proud Trent alumnus. Each week on Trent Talks, we bring together different experts to share knowledge, provide support, and bring optimism to our communities during this new COVID-19 era. Last week, our experts discussed what COVID-19 is and what our communities can expect to see over the coming weeks and months. And this week, I'm delighted to be joined by members of our Trent University School of Education faculty, Dr. Denise Handlarski and Dean Dr. Cathy Bruce, to discuss learning at home during a pandemic, along with some tips and strategies that you can try to incorporate into your new routines. Dr. Bruce's research focuses on young children's spatial reasoning and its relationships with their mathematics learning. And Dr. Handlarski has particular expertise in community-based learning, social justice, and history. Before we begin, it's important to first respectfully acknowledge that we are on the treaty and traditional territory of the Mississauga Anishinaabe. We offer our gratitude to the First Peoples for their care for and teachings about our earth and our relations. May we honor those teachings. Now, welcome, Cathy and Denise, and thank you for joining us today. Before we answer today's questions from our audience, Cathy, I wonder if you could share a bit of an overview on the elementary and secondary school year in Ontario and the pivot to the learning at home model we're seeing now.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Stephen. As you know, we had a fairly rapid move from school March break right into Ontario, asking everyone to stay home. And the government announced the school closures for a 2-week period, but then that has changed over time and it's now extended right until the end of May. There is a Learn at Home program, which involves teachers planning and connecting with their students to help them learn remotely. I would say it's been quite challenging transition for teachers and students and parents. Parents are often working from home while they're also trying to make sure their children and youth are learning, are staying active, are feeling well emotionally, aren't spending too much time on their screens. There's a lot to juggle. And of course, it's uneven out there for students in terms of what they have access to. Do they have access to computers and internet? Can they receive remote packages? That kind of thing.
Well, thank you. And Denise, I understand you teach courses that include equity in education. And first of all, what is equity in education? What does that mean? And then how does student access and equity, how are they impacted by the transition to at-home learning?
So equity is talking about how not everybody has the same opportunities or the same supports. And when we're in a regular school year, that sort of thing might be that there might be systematized or systemic racism or sexism or homophobia that some students experience when they're going through school. And of course, the challenges of class and poverty play out in a school environment in all sorts of ways. And we're seeing similar issues pop up as people start to respond to the pandemic. There's no question that those hardest hit by the pandemic are people who are marginalized, sometimes in more than one way. And so those are sometimes the students who are going to have problems meeting the demands of at-home learning. Lots of students without any equity issues as well. But as we're thinking about equity in this new sphere we find ourselves in, we're really wanting to ensure as best we can that all students have the same access to technology, to learning materials, to support as everybody else, so that we don't see an ever increasing gap in terms of student achievement.
Well, thanks. Thanks to both of you. That helps provide context for our audience submitted questions. And as you know, we've received a lot of those questions and have tried to combine them into the few most asked ones. So let's dive in, and maybe Cathy, will go to you first. Okay. Different students thrive in different learning environments. So what are some strategies that can be implemented for students, particularly those who might be struggling with the e-learning format?
Great question. First of all, there's many types of e-learning, so maybe I should just spend a minute talking about those. There's remote learning, which usually involves transferring learning from an in-person sort of classroom environment to a distance model. The learning was intended to be in person, but now it's been converted. So tasks via email or Zoom, those kinds of things are happening there. There's home learning, which is about integrated learning at home with limited support from external people, such as teachers. And there's online learning. Online learning usually refers to learning that's intended to be offered in an online platform, such as Blackboard or Google Classroom, and it's a bit more sophisticated in its approach. Any of these could be at play for children in Ontario at this time. So, to the question, what do you do when your child or student doesn't really thrive in an e-learning environment? I'd say two things about that. The first is you can try to minimize the online time by downloading files and printing if you have that capability in your home. And as Denise said, that may not be possible. You can encourage handwriting in notes and setting very clear and short parameters around the computer-based learning time. So 30 minutes here, 30 minutes there. And the second thing is to acknowledge that this is just part of the day. Children and youth are natural learners. They'll be learning throughout the day. It doesn't all take place with headphones and a screen or a worksheet.
I'm interested, I'm sort of going a little bit off the question here, but you and Denise talk about home learning. And I know here in Canada, we talk about, say, physical distancing, and in the US, they talk about social distancing. And in the US, it seems that people talk about homeschooling, and you talk about home learning. Is that a distinction or a distinction without a difference?
Well, homeschooling normally in Canada often means your child doesn't go to school at all, ever, even when schools are open. So you have elected to school your child, to educate your child from home entirely. So that's a difference between the two countries, a cultural difference. I'm not sure, but homeschooling usually refers to, that's a decision you've made for the long term that you're going to educate your child at home.
Okay, got it. And a follow-up question. Is there a difference depending on the age of the child? Put another way, does the approach to home learning differ between elementary and secondary school students?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that if that's okay. I do think there are some differences and some commonalities, and this might be an interesting time to experiment a little bit with new approaches, particularly because, as you said, not everybody might be thriving with the expectations that are placed before them. And so we tend to think about our youngest learners in kindergarten doing a lot of what we call play-based learning, which is where they simply learn by interacting with their environment and figuring out what drives their interest. There is some teacher-led activities, but a lot of it is based in play. And I think a lot of older students might benefit from a more sophisticated kind of play, but getting outside, figuring out what drives their interests and learning that way. It might not look like the online learning we're thinking about when we talk about online learning programs that, as Cathy mentioned, can be more sophisticated. So I think the questions go together. Older students can maybe foster a sense of play and see if that opens up new learning opportunities. And I do think my own experience, I have very young kids, is they're starting to get into a rhythm of having to do computer-based learning for the first time, and they're learning new things that way as well.
Well, and following in on that, supposing there's a family with multiple children in different grades, is there anything different that you might be doing, or what advice do you have for creating and supporting sort of non-teacher parents, and I guess even teacher parents would find it difficult in their newly expanded roles?
I think everybody has to figure out what's going to work best for them. One thing I would say is let's take the pressure off. The idea here is not that parents or caregivers are suddenly the teacher and expected to follow the entire Ontario curriculum, the expectation is that some learning is happening. And so if you've got kids with really, really different ages or abilities, then I would say try to find some work that's going to satisfy each of them individually, and some things that they can do together that might not be perfectly curricular for their particular level, but will still foster some learning at home. And people are experimenting with schedules. Some people have a really strict schedule. We're expecting our kids to do a lot of outdoor learning in the mornings, and then some more structured sort of reading and math and that kind of thing in the afternoon. And so I can imagine parents with students at different levels would be thinking about, I'll assign this book for you, but on the schedule, it's reading time, something like that.
Yeah, I think it's really important to find that balance at home. It's huge. So again, some parents I've spoken to, like Denise, so the morning's going to be our school learning, and our afternoon is activity time, outdoors with a magnifying glass, making a mud kitchen, going out on a bike ride, painting rocks, helping with the gardening, doing an experiment or something along that line. My youngest son, who's now an adult, but he took a whole term off in high school to travel. He was very lucky. I'm just going to say that right away. He's very lucky to be able to do that. But he learned so much that term, and it didn't just take place in the classroom. There's all kinds of ways to learn. So when Denise is talking about this sort of, balanced sometime with sort of school type learning, reading, whatever it may be, and to ensure that there's other kinds of time each day for students, no matter how old they are, whether they're young or older.
Yeah, I'm hearing something encouraging here, that it's not, it doesn't have to be in a set path. There's different ways. It's the learning time that's almost in some ways more important than the learning, and which I'm pleased to hear about, because let me give an example. I'm 72 years old, and let's use mathematics as an example, because Cathy, that's a specialty of yours. Back in my day, the dinosaur era, we memorized the timetables. I don't know whether people memorize the timetables now, but definitely most parents learned math through different strategies than the core math being taught in schools today. So how do parents learn the core math?
Yeah, good question. First of all, yes, of course, children are still learning math facts as part of their, their learning process in math. But, you have reminded me of a funny story, Stephen. The other day, a parent told me, my daughter came to me and she said, "Okay, Mom, I need some help with prime numbers." And the mom said, "Okay, I just need to do a few things first. I'll help you." So she goes away and she starts looking everything up online. What's prime numbers? How do they work? Why are they important? When do you use them? She went back and then helped her daughter. And she wrote me a little note afterwards about what prime numbers are, because she was very pleased with herself for what she learned. So there is this idea of not having to know everything right away. You can take a pause and look up sources. There's a Khan Academy for videos for high school math. TV Ontario has some amazing materials online. But I would suggest a playful approach whenever possible. Playing card games, Monopoly, measuring ingredients, playing dice games. Those are all number games. And they really help to reinforce math facts. And I would say, and this is important, to be careful about causing math stress. There's good research showing that if your child's stressed with memorizing, especially timed tasks, that stress can lead to math anxiety, and that can have lasting effects. And the pressure, or sometimes unintended anger from a parent, can make that worse. So parents need to try and be calm and supportive. If you don't know the math or the approach being used, set it aside, ask, check in, take a pause, or try another approach like a game. Those are some ways to think about it. At Trent, our Faculty of Education has set up a website for teachers and parents and student resources. And one of the resource links there is to fraction problems, and they're fun fraction problems. So, there's a lot of of ways to go about this, but most importantly, to stay calm and treat it as something fun wherever possible.
Well, and I mean, students are facing anxiety. We are all facing anxieties now. I mean, we're in a completely different world. So you talked about math anxiety. I mean, there's probably a lot of other anxieties that students are facing. So maybe Denise, you could chime in on, what can parents do to soothe their children's worries and indeed their own worries?
Well, I think a lot of what Cathy said about math applies to any other subject as well. I would say a lot of parents or caregivers right now are really fighting with their kids to do their work, and the fighting is taking a toll on everybody. And so, one thing to focus on is that it's probably less important to get through all the work and more important to focus on approaches. And so, with my daughter, we've been working on time management a little bit. And I said, look, you've got this, the teacher assigns the week's worth of work on Monday. You can do a little bit every day. You can do a lot one day and take the next day off. You decide. So she's in the driver's seat and she gets to figure out those skills as well as actually getting the work done. But my good friend's teacher said, none of the work is as important as focusing on 3 H's. And those are happiness, health, and harmony. And the reality is we are doing this home learning in a pandemic. It is different than when people elect to homeschool their kids on a typical, in a typical year. And so there is stress. People are worried about loved ones. And it is sad not to be able to see your friends when you're young, for all of us, really. And so it's okay to acknowledge those stressors and say, we know when people are stressed out, they are less likely to learn. So let's put less pressure on covering the material and more emphasis on harmony. How can we make this fun? How can we take the stress out of it? We'll get done what we get done, but I don't think it's worth the fight for most of our families.
It's also not a race. We're not racing to get to some magic curriculum here. It's more, children will catch up when they get back to school as well. So it's more as Denise is saying, try and find some enjoyment with it. Have your children do things that they love to do. Maybe they love to read, or maybe they love to paint, or whatever it may be. Providing them those opportunities are equally important.
Excellent. That makes me feel better. I'd love to take your time management course, Denise. Next question. Access to technology is allowing students to continue the learning process, but access to technologies is not equal. And many families don't have access to the tools and technology that might be required for virtual learning. So how do we address issues like these in the urgent move to learning online?
Well, I would say I am really impressed at the way our boards of education scrambled to get devices into the hands of students who didn't have them. It was nothing short of heroic and amazing what's been done. That doesn't mean it's been perfect, of course. There are still access issues. One thing we're learning is that it's not only about the device, it's also about access to the internet, which if you live in a more rural location might be more of a challenge. And I know a local school board did make all of their parking lots Wi-Fi zones to try to address that need, which is awesome, but still one needs a car in many cases to get to one of those places. So there simply are access and equity problems, and there will be regardless. One thing that we know from students with special education needs is that very often having access to a device helps immensely, but sometimes it really doesn't. And we simply can't meet the needs of all learners by issuing some kind of tablet or something like that. And so I think that teachers are doing a great job trying to figure out how to meet the needs of their students. My partner teaches very high needs special ed, and so his students have developmental disabilities and are on the autism spectrum. And he's working with parents to try to recreate some of the same structures and routines at home that they have at school, because those students thrive on structure. They're not really using their devices that much, but the learning that's going on is still really valuable. So I think, when we talk about equity and access, it's all kinds of things. I would encourage families to think about technology really broadly. It doesn't only mean a computer or tablet. That we can think about natural technologies. There are a lot of kids who are getting outside much more now than in a typical time, and that might be really beneficial. Actually, there might be upsides. So I think a lot of people are anxious about the things that they can't access, and I always want to encourage people to focus on what you do have available to you and how to make the most of that.
Well, thanks for that, Denise. And now another question from our audience at home. Looking forward to maybe a few weeks from now, or hopefully it's a few weeks from now, when we're less self-isolated, and certainly in the fall and later on when the kids are back at school, is what we're going through now going to influence the methods that we use to teach, how we teach, our pedagogy?
I hope so, Stephen. I think there's a few things that have happened in the last while that are quite encouraging, actually. And one of them is this idea of the play-based learning or inquiry-based learning, where we are exploring, children are a little bit more independent, they're doing some problem solving, and they're also in nature, as Denise mentioned, nature-based learning. I'm hoping that those approaches will actually gain some momentum as students are learning now in nature and through their own sort of resourcefulness. And this sort of combination of a more open approach could actually be adopted more readily in the classroom. I think the students are learning a lot, and they're going to teach us some things from this experience.
Well, we're rapidly coming to the close of the show, and as always, we do like to end on a positive note. Although I will say that both of your discussions today really have had some very positive elements built into it. There was a recent article in the New York Times with the headline, "How Remote Learning is Breaking Parents." And parents are stressing out because they don't feel they're being successful. But the central message of the article was really, take it easy on yourself. This is a difficult time, and really, whatever you can accomplish, simply the effort is wonderful. And so I wonder, maybe Denise, I'll go to you first. What are the positive takeaways and lessons we can take forward?
I think one of them is that we can really do hard things. And obviously, nobody would have chosen to be in this situation, but it is incredible how our communities have come together at this time, how fast we did all learn to pivot. And I think we can all remember the next time we're doing something that's challenging, that we were able to get through a really, really difficult time. We did it by working together, and we did it by finding a little bit of grit. And in schools right now, we talk a lot about resilience. This is a time that I think is really fostering resilience in our students and their whole family.
Yeah, I would add to that. I think what I've noticed, and parents are telling me too, is that their children are becoming more resourceful. They have to work things out a little bit more independently and try to figure it out. And this is a really nice counter narrative to the, helpless student and the helicopter parent scenarios that we often hear. These youth are building their independence and their creativity and their resourcefulness. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it's a good thing. I would also add, I've heard from families talking about these very special moments they're having together. And I actually have had those with my family as well. Maybe they're making a puzzle or baking. They're just having a moment together that wouldn't have happened otherwise. And so, maybe it balances out with these times when parents want to pull their hair out, understandably. I have this really simple thing, the ABC, the idea of an ABC method. So, it's a way to think about how we could consider this whole experience for children learning at home. The first is just being active. So getting outside, getting in the yard, that's the A. Taking little walks, even if it's 5 minutes, dancing to music, whatever that is. The B is balanced. balancing your day, not stressing about the work, but trying to, make sure that there's some time for the students, the children, to be playing games, to be doing a little bit of work, and then absolutely doing nothing. Like maybe balance involves just being quiet and just, not really doing anything. Anyway, and the C is casual. What I mean by that is it's an underloaded time. We need to underload, not overload. So we're not driving our children to, gymnastics and then to hockey practice and then to, this club and that club. It's kind of changed all of that. So it's much more casual, but it does kind of allow us, I hope, a little bit to take a breath.
Oh, that's very encouraging. Thank you so much, both of you, for your wonderful words today. We do have to wrap it up now. But for those of you out there, please be sure to join us next week when we'll be discussing family dynamics, which can be difficult in these times, cozying up while cooped up with Trent University Durham GTA social faculty, Dr. Dalen Taylor, and Dr. Marina Morgenstern. And you can submit questions for next week's topic and continue the discussion on social media, as always, by using the hashtag Trent Talks. And I do like to close by reminding you that you are not alone. When this is over, and at some point it will be over, if we continue to all pull together exactly the way we are already pulling together, the new normal could be significantly better than the old one. I hope to see you next week.